After 16 years of war, Afghanistan invites the Taliban to talk peace, this time without preconditions. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the offer of peace talks between Afghanistan and the Taliban. They've been fighting for almost 2 decades, but now the Afghan government has invited the Taliban back to the table for peace talks. President Ashraf Ghani made the offer during a conference in Kabul. He proposed a ceasefire, a prisoner swap, and recognition of the Taliban as a legitimate political party. In return, the Taliban would have to recognize the government and respect the rule of law. It's not the first time talks like this have been proposed, but on every other occasion, the Taliban has turned them down. Here's the moment Ghani made the offer.
I call on the Taliban and their leadership. Today, the decision is in your hands. Accept peace, a dignified peace. Come together to safeguard this country, which has been the result of our sacrifices and struggle.
So what makes this offer any different, and will they accept it? Let's ask our guests. Joining me now in New York is Barnett Rubin. He helped open secret negotiations with the Taliban and is now a senior fellow and associate director of the Center on International Cooperation. In Kabul, we have a former Afghan ambassador to the UK, Ahmed Wali Masood. He's now the chairman of the Masood Foundation in Afghanistan. And finally, in New Delhi is Helena Malikyar. She's the commissioner of the Independent Anti-Corruption Monitoring and Evaluation Committee for Afghanistan. I'm really happy that I have all three of you for the program. It's an important discussion to have. Ambassador Masood, let me begin with you. Ashraf Ghani's approach to the Taliban, extending the olive branch, if you like, is this a sign of strength, or is it weakness and capitulation?
Thank you very much. Well, let me begin that obviously it's a sign of weakness, not because that people of Afghanistan do not want peace. Of course, everyone in this country wants peace. But the problem is that it's almost based on the constitution of the country. And the 3 months is left for Ashraf Ghani's reign in this country. So, of course, it's not practical to give that sort of olive branch and say that, well, come and we make peace. Because for the past 17 years, so far, it has been, everybody has been trying to get peace in this country, but it has not been successful. I think that we have got a lot of preconditions before we go to peace. It's not that you come here and I give you this one at the expense of all the achievement for the past 17 years and the sacrifice of the Afghan people that every day they are being sacrificed because of them. So that's not that easy that Ashraf Ghani thinks that is. So it's not practical, it's not a sign of strength, it's not a genuine intention. I don't think so. Okay,
Helena Malikyar, is it not going to work? Is it not practical?
I think it's not a sign of weakness from the on the part of the president of Afghanistan. On the contrary, I think given the changing realities on the ground with the new US policy, with putting pressure on Pakistan, I think this is a time that the Afghan government can more confidently extend the olive branch, as you said. And also, I think the way the president of Afghanistan talked yesterday, he offered his perspective on how to start a peace process. I don't think the message was one that he would want to achieve peace in 3 months. I think he just put forward a general framework for how to start the process. Let's not forget that any peace process is a process, not something that could happen overnight.
Yeah, well put. Barnett Rubin, Ashraf Ghani mentioned the word ceasefire. He wants a ceasefire first, and then everything else can proceed from there. I read your open letter to the Taliban, really excellent letter, and it was a really interesting timeline in terms of your negotiations with them and experience of them over the years. Realistically, you also want a ceasefire. You asked them to adhere to a ceasefire in that letter. Are they actually going to adhere to a ceasefire, given that for 16 or 17 years, they've gobbled up more and more land, they're fighting this insurgency, and they're doing okay?
Well, first, let me greet my friends Helena Malikyar and Ahmed Wali Massoud. I did not realize that that was who I would be on here with. I haven't seen either of them in a long time, so my best wishes to you. Second, I think that if we conceive of peace negotiations in the context only of is it a sign of strength or is it a sign of weakness, we will never make any progress. Because if the only way you reach agreement is by proving the other side is weak, then nobody will admit they're weak. The point is not to, it's not a test of strength, it's a test of vision. Who has a vision for Afghanistan from which all Afghans and the rest of the international community will be able to benefit? And I think that is what President Ghani was trying to offer. He specifically said, that there should not be any winners and losers ultimately, and that is the only way that it is possible to make peace. Now, as far as the ceasefire is concerned, let's not ask, is it possible? If people only tried to do things that were easy, nobody would accomplish anything. So the point is not how easy is it, how fast will it happen. The point is, how committed are we to trying to achieve our goals?
Ahmed Wali Massoud, does it still put a bitter taste in your mouth, given that they still maim and massacre civilians, they blow up Afghans on a monthly basis, they still target the Afghan security forces? At the genesis of all of this, they worked with Al-Qaeda to kill your brother, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Do you not trust these people?
Well, of course, for the past 2 decades, people of Afghanistan again and again have tried to make peace with them. Even my late brother Massoud, he risked his life during the Mujahideen government, went to Maidan Wardak to make peace with the Taliban Council. But when he came back, he was very disappointed about them. He said that, well, Taliban is not, they do not have their own control. Somebody else is controlling them. So therefore, they do not have their own control still. So therefore, when we really offer peace to Taliban, who we talk to, who is their leader, even their leader, Mullah Omar, who was killed or died or assassinated, no one knew what happened to him and who killed him and what happened to the rest of the Taliban then who should have claimed their leader who killed them. So therefore, it's a sort of network, so-called Taliban. So it's been used by many interest parties. The government of Afghanistan, the Pakistani and other involved circles, Taliban to make peace. But so far, for the past 17 years, we have not seen a trace of peace. On the contrary, we have seen the expansion of terrorism, massacre, blood, and all of this bloodshed, disappointment. So therefore, when I say that at the end of his term, Mr. Ghani, when he says, I give you an olive branch, I don't know whether he has talked to the people of Afghanistan, whether he has reached consensus with the different institutions in this country, whether he has come up with some sort of plan which has been agreed with the people. He has not done these sort of things. Even not only that Ashraf Ghani for the past 4 years, he has been pursuing the policy of divide and rule in this country. So still he has not been able to make a peace inside his own government, to make one national government in this country. You can see the president is here, the vice president in Turkey, the CEO has got a different vision about the Taliban. You can see the governor of Balkh is saying something else. So therefore it's not a united government to make a peace proposal for so-called Taliban. I believe that once we get the proper national government, we can talk from the position of a strength, then we can talk to the mentor of the Taliban, if it's Pakistan or any other circle. Then, of course, we have to get people involvement in agreement, their consensus as well. Then we can be hopeful for peace. We should not use the context of peace for our own political
that's a really good point.
Advantages.
Okay,
we should not use it populistic.
Interesting point. Helena Malikyar, would you concur that Ashraf Ghani needs to maybe get his own house in order first, sort out issues of governance, issues of corruption, issues of Tajiks and others feeling marginalized, and have a unified front before even thinking about talking to the Taliban?
I think Afghanistan right now has started to go through a very important and inevitable transition from having the former Mujahideen leaders and commanders as the sole people in positions of power, transitioning from that to a new generation of Afghans. And of course, like any other transition period, this is painful. This will cause a lot of problems for this government, for the whole society as a whole. And I think some of the statements that Ambassador Massoud has just made reflects that, because he is part of that elite that is being phased out right now. But I think maybe the Afghan president needs to do a lot more work on putting things in line in his own government and within the Afghan politics, domestic politics. But at the same time, when it comes to the issue of peace, I think there is consensus. The whole country wants this war to end. And the way the president framed it yesterday was, I think, something that no Afghan politician can afford to oppose, because he asked for the Taliban to respect rule of law in Afghanistan, to respect legitimacy of the Afghan state, to respect the constitution and the rights that are in the Afghan constitution, especially women's rights.
Right.
These are the basic red lines that he put forward.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone can disagree to that.
Okay. Before I go back to Barnett Rubin, I just want Ahmed Wali Massoud, Mr. Ambassador, if you want to address the point that you're part of the elite that's being phased out. Maybe that's why you don't like Ashraf Ghani that much.
No, that's not the case. I think Ms. Helena knows herself what I'm talking about. I don't know how come that she has changed overnight. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is not that. We are here. We have been in Afghanistan. We have been fighting against the Taliban, against the terrorism. We have been fighting against the Russian invasion forces. We have given sacrifice. We have given our brother. We have gone many. So therefore, we are here the true defender of this country. So therefore, that's not the case. If she talks about these commanders, let me ask her that. The newly appointed commanders, who she called the warlords, including Almas, including Jur'at, including Gulaw Shizu, it's a recently appointed leaders who Mr. Ashraf Ghani have brought to the government. Is that right or not? If it's right, so it means that that formula that Mr. Ashraf Ghani has transitioned to the new generation is wrong. It's not wrong. He is pursuing ethno-tribalistic policy in Afghanistan, which have killed the soul of this nation. Therefore, before anything to do with the Taliban, he has to really clean his own house. Look at the government, look at General Dostum, look at Dr. Abdullah, who is CEO, look at the governor, look at inside his own government.
Right.
Look at those who are supported. Just a few days ago, I met one of his big supporters, Honorable Mr. Mujaddidi. He was very disappointed about why he supported Mr. Ashraf Ghani. So therefore, that's very crystal clear. What I'm trying to say, everybody in Afghanistan wants peace. But before we go to peace, it was the rhetoric of Mr. Ashraf Ghani in the campaign that we really have to talk from the position of strength. Today, we are at the weakest point at the moment. Afghanistan is undergoing a very problematic situation. It is really dangerous, getting very dangerous. So therefore, I'm not saying that I'm pro Ashraf Ghani. No. But as far as the peace is concerned, it's a national issue. It is concerned everybody, not only Ashraf Ghani, not only somebody else.
Understood.
Everyone has to talk about this.
Yeah, and if you'll allow me, I want to sort of depart from the internal politics and the machinations. And I want to talk again now, Barnett Rubin, about the Taliban and their intentions, because there's an interesting web here. So Ashraf Ghani and the Afghan government want to reach out to the Taliban. The Taliban, according to the best available evidence and the most recent evidence, don't want to talk to the Afghan government. They want to talk to the Americans. They're sending letters to the American people. They're saying, let's negotiate directly with the Americans. And in my experience over the years, every time I've ever spoken to a representative of the Taliban, they say they only want to talk to the Americans after the Americans leave the country. How do we even solve this riddle?
Well, first, I'd like to say that no Afghans can be phased out of Afghanistan. And we can't solve the problem inside the government separately from the problem with the Taliban and the problem with the United States. It is all one problem. So we can't do one first and the other later. Now, as far as what the Taliban want, actually, I mean, when I was in the United States government, we did talk to the Taliban, and what they said in private was a little bit different from what you have said. They insisted that they wanted to talk to the United States first, because from their point of view, the most important issue is the presence of the U.S. military forces in Afghanistan, because after all, the Taliban were not overthrown by Hamid Karzai or by Ashraf Ghani or by Dr. Abdullah. They were overthrown by the United States. That's their problem. They want to talk to the United States. They don't want to talk to the, they say, to the Afghan government while the United States' military forces are in Afghanistan supporting the Afghan government. Now, that's a reasonable position, but on the other hand, we know from experience that if the U.S. were to just withdraw its forces before a political settlement, it would have the same type of result as when the Soviet Union withdrew its forces and we go into a civil war. So there has to be a negotiation about how to link a troop withdrawal with a political settlement in such a way as to preserve the stability of Afghanistan and the gains that the country has made.
Ambassador Masood, for the moment, the U.S. policy seems to be we're going to hammer them until they cave, and then maybe we can talk. That's basically what Donald Trump wants to do. If not Ashraf Ghani's plan, is Trump's plan the more reasonable one?
Well, let me put it this way. Afghanistan have survived either with a sort of balance or in national consensus inside the country or foreign agreement. When in the 18th, 19th century, when Russian and British, when they agreed to give Afghanistan as a buffer zone, buffer state, then of course Afghanistan got independent. Until 1979. 1979, Russia invaded. Once again, that was toppled, and now we are living in a sort of imbalanced situation. So therefore, yes, if we get the agreement, national consensus inside the country, if we have got a national government, then from the position of strength, we can propose talk peace with the Taliban, to Pakistan, to any other entry. Or if the foreign countries, all of them, especially the regional countries, they agree that we should leave Afghanistan intact, nobody should pursue its own strategic interests or conflicting interests in Afghanistan, then again, we can have a relative peace in this country. Without one of these formula, we cannot have peace. We cannot have peace with sort of populistic ideas or kind of making publicity that, well, we can make peace. 17 years gone. A lot of resources from Afghanistan, a lot of sacrifice, times, and all of this energy gone, but so far is still we are deeper in this sort of problem than coming out of the problem. So therefore, this sort of formula which Ashraf Ghani has proposed, and Ashraf Ghani has proposed this sort of formula for the past 17 years as well. It has not worked, it will not work. I hope that that will work. Eventually, Taliban will come to peace, but it doesn't work. We should not really mislead the people of Afghanistan, give a false hope, and we should not mislead the international community.
Right. I have two final questions for
May I
both
add
Helena
something?
Malik. Okay, Barnett, come in. Please, go ahead.
It's important to note that he made this offer at an international conference in front of the 25 most important countries and organizations that are supporting Afghanistan. So he's making this offer with the support of the entire international community. And he did not only address the Taliban, he also addressed Pakistan. I think it's very important. Everyone knows you cannot have peace in Afghanistan without Pakistan. And it is up to Pakistan to put pressure on and to persuade the Taliban to discuss this offer that Ashraf Ghani has made. So everyone understands that Pakistan has a role to play as well.
Oh, that's a crucial point that you made. So let me go to Helena Malik.
If I may just...
Can I add something to this? Can I add something to it? And if you could fold in your response to my addition. If they are included in the process, they come to the table, they have peace talks, aren't you concerned that all these developments over the past 17 years on religious liberty, on women's rights and so forth might be in jeopardy?
I just would like to contribute to the earlier question. I just wanted to say that President Trump's strategy and President Ghani's call for a negotiation table, they're not necessarily against one another, but they complement one another. One does not have to choose either or. But to come to your last question, this is why I emphasized earlier also that the red lines that President Ghani presented yesterday in his talk, those guarantee that any negotiation with the Taliban will have to start from that point, from accepting the Afghan constitution and the rights of citizens that is in that constitution, including women's rights, and the gains that Afghanistan has had in the past 16, 17 years, that will be the starting point as far as Ashraf Ghani is concerned, right, according to the plan that he proposed yesterday.
Okay, well, we hope it works out. Helena Malikyar, Barnett Rubin, and Ahmed Wali Masood, I sincerely thank all of you for joining us here on The Newsmakers. It was a really good discussion. Still ahead on The Newsmakers, China's Communist Party announces plans to abolish term limits. Will Xi Jinping become president for life? And Islamic academic Tariq Ramadan behind bars after being charged with rape. But without a conviction, is his treatment justified? From pig farmer to leader of one of the most powerful nations in the world, Chinese President Xi Jinping's rise to the top has been pretty incredible. And it seems he could be staying there for a long time to come. China's ruling Communist Party has announced that it intends to abolish presidential term limits. While there had been hints this could be on the cards, many were surprised it's come so early in President Xi's time at the helm. China introduced these caps on their leaders decades ago, and not everyone is too happy with the new proposal. And many are speaking out, even in a country where public dissent is rare. For more, here's Shoaib Hassan.
It's the latest example in a rising tide of autocratic rule around the world. These amendments to the Chinese constitution. They scrap the limit on the number of terms the president can serve, opening the door for current President Xi Jinping to rule indefinitely. Xi's term in office has already seen displays of power and strength. They include his signature anti-corruption drive. That's seen the sacking of senior party members and the rise of China's military and economic clout. Both signal its ascendancy as American power seems on the decline across Asia. It's something that many Chinese increasingly believe can only be accomplished under Xi.
If Xi gets re-elected, he has been paramount for China's economic development. Also, he can continue to drive the existing anti-corruption clampdown, and that will help to boost political and economic development in the future.
These protesters in Hong Kong believe the amendments are a step back for China.
In today's world where we are improving towards a more democratic society, China's Communist Party is restoring a monarchy, becoming more feudal and becoming more of a dictatorship. This is absolutely wrong and will harm China's development and will make China a country lagging further behind.
And there's been further criticism coming from around the world, something Beijing has been quick to respond to.
I suggest everyone to understand a new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics in a positive way. As for those improper guesses and comments that you mentioned, I hope that everyone can understand the voice of the Chinese people.
As far as the Communist Party is concerned, that voice is singing praises to the leadership of Xi, something that may soon be enshrined in the constitution with what's called the Xi Jinping thought on socialism part of the amendments. In Parliament, the ratification of these amendments and his re-election are a mere formality. But what will they mean for the future of China and its role in the world? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Beijing by China analyst Einar Tangen. He specializes in international politics and economics. And in Washington, D.C., we have Dean Cheng, a senior research fellow at the Asian Studies Center. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Dean, let me begin with you. With the move to abolish term limits, is Xi Jinping going to be president for life?
Well, I'm not sure that he will be president for life, but it looks like he is setting himself up to be president for a very long time. His current term would end in 2022. The expectation now is that he would therefore stay on for at least a third term through 2027 and quite probably through perhaps 2032 or even 2037.
Okay, so Einar, are we seeing the Chinese leadership becoming more of a one-man show?
No, I think you have to look at this in a historical context. Remember, Deng Xiaoping did something very similar when he realized that in order to push China forward, he needed to make sure that there was a leadership way and also apparatus to make sure that everything occurred according to the plan. Now, remember, Deng, there was no question that he was in control. He not only chose his successor, but then thereafter, he chose his successor's successor. Right. Both Zhang and Hu were chosen by him. So what you have here is, I think Xi believes he has a very strong position in terms of what China needs to do, both to deal with outside threats and also internal threats.
So do you think it's the right decision in order, Einar, to push China forward, as you say?
At this point, I do. I mean, there's some realities to this. Remember, this is a huge organization that you're talking about, 1.4 billion people, and tens and millions of government workers. In order to get the kind of far-reaching changes that he set about in terms of anti-corruption, the poverty, Belt and Road, all of these things which he thinks are crucial to the further development of China, bringing it to a first world power, you have to make sure that the troops believe that you're going to see it through. If they don't believe that, quite frankly, they will turn away from you, or they will just decide that they don't want to get too involved.
Okay, Dean, what do you think? Is it necessary that perhaps China needs more authoritarianism in order to keep itself stable and moving forward?
I'm afraid the argument that you need authoritarianism in order to move things forward, one, can be applied to any and every society. It is essentially an abandonment. It is an argument against democracy. It's an argument against any kind of restraint on political leadership. The reality is that Deng Xiaoping himself actually created or pushed through a restructuring of both the party and the national constitutions to impose term limits, either formally in the constitution for the government or informally within the party leadership. And this was because he and other Chinese leaders of the time saw the dangers of a Mao Zedong, who made exactly these sorts of arguments, that you needed a great helmsman. You needed someone with absolute dictatorial powers in order to see things through. That is the kind of power that also led to things like the Great Leap Forward, one of the worst famines of the 20th century, and the Cultural Revolution, which utterly destabilized much of Chinese society for over a decade. You need constraints on power, or else, as Lord Acton said, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Okay, so Einar, this is an example of those constraints being unknotted, if you like. What happened to checks and balances? He's just going to be surrounded by yes men, right, as he moves forward. That can't be a good thing.
Well, I think you severely underestimate exactly how the Chinese government works forward. This is not a dictatorship of one person. This has to be taken by the Standing Committee, by the Politburo, and it has to be approved. Now, quite frankly, once a decision is made, they do follow generally in lockstep behind it, because that is the system that they have. But, I don't buy into my colleague's argument that, Deng didn't do this. He did wield absolute power. And it's yet to be seen exactly how Xi will handle the power transition after he goes. And calling this authoritarian is a little bit off the mark, given that we don't know exactly what he's going to do. And it's quite possible that he will, as Deng did, unwind a lot of the apparatus that he believes he needs currently in order to get these things through. I don't think you can argue with China's success. And while it is often very nice to talk about, in theory, the practicalities of wielding power, and I'm not in favor of authoritarianism or anything like that, but I wouldn't label it this. He's doing what is necessary. Governments have to provide public safety and the public welfare. If they don't do it, they're a failed government. And we see that around the world in governments that supposedly have these checks and balances.
Okay.
So before we start casting aspersions, I think it's necessary to look carefully at where you're coming from.
And Dean, looking at the system, it appears that at times the party chief and the army chief have more power than the president. So doesn't Einar make a good point here that we're underestimating the Chinese system and kind of seeing it as a monolith?
Well, first off, I would certainly agree that it is not a monolith. But when we examine the consolidation of power that Xi has already done over the last 5 years, the number of leading small groups and other various committees where he is consistently the head, I have to say I'm very impressed by Xi Jinping. The man must sleep no more than 2 hours a night. But also in terms of the likely structuring, we are seeing not so much an unwinding as a reconsolidation of authority towards the top. Xi Jinping has just created, shaped really, a new Politburo and Politburo Standing Committee comprised of people that are going to be loyal to him. I don't see much evidence here that he is brooking dissent. I'm really not sure why we should feel much optimism.
Okay, so Einar, let's remove the word authoritarianism for a moment and let's say undemocratic. Is this proof that you don't have to be democratic in order to be prosperous, in order to be powerful? Because that's been a mantra for many countries around the world. Is China proof that you can be prosperous and not have any democracy?
Well, China has its own form of democracy, and that's the problem. If you go around and you look, the United States, Donald Trump was not elected with the popular vote. He was voted by an anachronistic mechanism called the Electoral College. So we have to be very careful about how we're doing this. What are we judging this against? And in terms of the unwinding, I'm talking about unwinding after he's gotten his agenda through, and that's when he's transitioning power. This is the really, and I would agree with my colleague on this, there is a danger that if he were to transition all of this power to somebody else who was fighting for it, then you could have a real situation. But I think he will follow Deng's example. He will lead with strength at this point and then unwind it as he's transitioning.
Right. So, Dean, you said you respect the man. You said that you're fascinated by him. He must only sleep 2 hours a night. Do you feel, given the current system, given his personality and given his aptitude, that in the foreseeable future, Xi Jinping might just be the leader to take China to superpower status, whether he has checks and balances or not?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think part of this gets us deep into policy issues. One of the real problems that we're seeing, and this is partly related to Xi, but partly related to a broader set of systemic issues, is that we're seeing a significant slowdown, if not rejection, of economic reform. And this actually began under Xi's immediate predecessor, Hu Jintao. We have seen, again, consolidation of economic power in the state, and this is not just within Xi's hands. We have seen a real unwillingness to engage in fundamental necessary economic reforms, whether of the state banking system or state-owned enterprises. This is also beginning to impact China's ability to engage in technological and other innovation. So in the longer term, I'm very mixed about whether we're not, regardless of Xi's immediate power seizures, whether we're not China can, in fact, make that further leap out of the so-called middle-income trap to a higher status that is really necessary if China truly wants to be a military, economic, and political superpower.
Okay, well, we'll be watching closely. Time will tell. It's a cliche, but only time will tell, indeed. Einar Tangen and Dean Cheng, for the moment, I must thank you both. Thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Tariq Ramadan has made a career fighting for what he believes in. Now he's facing a fight for his own freedom. The Islamic academic has been detained in a French prison for the last 30 days after 2 women accused him of violent sexual assault. But Ramadan's family says they've had no contact with him and that his treatment is unfair. And they're not alone. A campaign to free him has gained significant support, raising more than $100,000. But with allegations so serious, some question why there's even a campaign in the first place. So, is Tariq Ramadan's incarceration a travesty of justice, or are the French treating him like anyone else? That debate in a moment, but first, here's this report by Annelise Borges.
We have millions of European Muslims. They speak English as well as you. They speak the language.
He spoke on behalf of many who believed in a different narrative for Muslims in Europe.
We need to talk about God in a different way.
A reformist who also challenged the most conservative interpretations of Islam.
Le principal ennemi des musulmans, que ce soit en France ou à travers le monde, c'est l'ignorance. L'ignorance de soi et l'ignorance par et à travers autrui.
But for nearly a month, the polemic philosopher's voice has been silenced. Tariq Ramadan has been arrested and held for a crime he has yet to be convicted of. Tariq Ramadan is accused of rape by two women. One whose identity hasn't been revealed since she was sexually abused in 2009. The second, Handa Ayari, wrote a book about her experience in 2012, but only revealed Ramadan's identity last year.
J'ai jamais vécu ça. Ça a été l'horreur, l'horreur. Il s'est littéralement jeté sur moi comme une bête sauvage.
Solidarité avec les... Both cases became public late last year, when women began sharing accounts of sexual harassment and assault as part of the Me Too campaign. Tariq Ramadan denies both accounts. Tariq Ramadan's supporters started a campaign online. They believe he's been vilified for being a vocal Muslim and say the case is politically motivated. But a panel of judges ruled Ramadan poses a flight risk and could be prone to reoffend. And according to France's Criminal Procedure Code, that's enough to justify pre-trial detention. And Tariq Ramadan's accusers also say they have been threatened in the past. But even among those who criticize the scholar, there are some who doubt due process is being followed. The court's decision to deny bail and place him in solitary confinement, combined with the fact that the prosecutor's office lost documents filed as part of his defense, have turned this into one of France's most controversial judicial cases. For his supporters, it's a case that confronts the country's complex concept of identity. For the alleged victims, it's one that will ultimately test its commitment to justice. Annelise Borges, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, let's go to our panel. I'm joined now from London by Roshan Mohammed Saleh. He's an editor of one of Britain's most popular Muslim news websites, 5 Pillars. And in Oxford, we have journalist and writer Shaista Aziz. Thanks both of you for joining us. Shaista, let me begin with you. What do you think of this campaign to free Tariq Ramadan?
Well, I think people are entitled to campaign for whatever they wish to campaign for, but I think it's an interesting campaign because I'm wondering and questioning why there are not campaigns showing solidarity with women, particularly Muslim women, who are brave enough to speak out about allegations around rape and sexual assault and abuse that they've suffered. I think that the wider issues around Tariq Ramadan's case is precisely this. It's around the silencing of women, it's around the shaming of women, and it goes beyond the case of one professor who happens to be a Muslim man. We're already seeing the outpouring of stories and allegations that have come forward in the last sort of 12 to 13 days around the aid sector. We know about the Me Too movement. I think all of this fits into the wider issues around patriarchy, around power, how it's wielded, and the impact that it has on women. And in this case, particularly Muslim women, we are silenced, marginalized, and when some of us are able to speak out, we are facing a barrage of criticism from within our communities by many men, some of whom actually think they're doing the right thing, they're trying to protect women. But what I say to those men is silencing women is not protecting women, it's actually allowing abuses to continue, and we have to break that silence.
Okay, so Roshan, is supporting the campaign to free Tariq Ramadan a way of silencing women who could be victims here?
think it is. I do agree with Shaista that patriarchy exists, in the Muslim world. That's pretty obvious. There are pretty regressive attitudes towards women, which I would argue are cultural attitudes. They don't spring from Islam. But anti-women sentiment, unfortunately, is something that the Muslim world has to combat. But I don't particularly want to kind of mix that up with the Tariq Ramadan case. I think under normal circumstances, we shouldn't even be commenting about the Tariq Ramadan case. We should just let French justice, so-called French justice, take its course. But unfortunately, what we're seeing with his particular case is a campaign of media demonization against him in the French media, which is poisoning the atmosphere around the case, and which means that he can't possibly get a free trial. He's been held for 1 month without formal charge in detention. His family haven't had access to him. He is in very poor health, yet he's being kept under prison conditions where doctors can't take care of him properly. And there also seems to be some, degree of collusion between the witnesses in this case and certain Islamophobes in France. So while I do 100% agree that Muslim women are hard done by, generally, in the Muslim world, I think we can make that statement. I think in this case, Tariq Ramadan deserves our support.
Shaista?
Well, what I say to that is, at the heart of this whole issue around not just Tariq Ramadan, but like I said, sexual violence, allegations of rape, they happen across communities, across races, is this issue of the extra burden that women have to carry. So, for example, when Bill Cosby was accused of rape and other very serious allegations, his victims said, they were black women, they said they had to think long and hard before they came forward to report these cases because they knew that this was going to further add to the vilification of black men. And the same thing is happening around this Tariq Ramadan case, and indeed other men, Muslim men, who have been accused of carrying out this type of violence against women. And so the point here is that women should be allowed to make allegations, to report them to the police. The men who are accused should absolutely have a right to a fair trial. They should not be subjected to trial by media, neither should the women. But the point is that when women do make these allegations, we have to think long and hard, because we know there's Islamophobia out there, we know there's racism out there. Our pain, our stories are then weaponized by the right wing, but they're also weaponized by our own men in our own communities, and indeed many women who also are, the custodians of patriarchy. So I think women should not have to carry all of these burdens. They should simply be allowed to be victims or survivors, and they should be able to seek redress and seek justice without all of this being dumped on them on top of what they've suffered.
Roshan, what makes you so convinced that his treatment by French authorities means it would now be impossible to determine whether he committed rape or not?
Well, Imran, I've lived in France. I speak the language. I know the French mentality. It is a secular fundamentalist country. Their idea of secularism is very harsh. It's not the multiculturalism we see in Britain, for example, and that's why we see lots of French women who have been banned from wearing the headscarf, for example, in schools and at universities. They're actually coming to England, where there is more of a permissive environment. And the French take this concept of laïcité to the nth degree, quite frankly. We have 5 million Muslims in France, sociologically very disadvantaged. We have a surveillance culture. The mosques, the state tries to control the mosques, and at the same time, France is involved in military action in the Muslim world. So we have a very kind of battered community there in France. Now, Tariq Ramadan himself, in Britain, he is considered something of a wet liberal amongst the Muslim community here. He's someone who believes in the West, who believes in Western justice. Whereas in France, he's treated like Osama bin Laden, quite frankly.
But Roshan,
the media demonization against him. That's why he can't get a fair trial.
But certainly, all of that doesn't take away from the fact that he might still plausibly have committed rape and that the women aren't lying. Would you agree?
Well, of course, but that's not for you or me to decide.
Can I just come in here,
That's for
please?
take its course.
Shaista?
Yeah, I just want to come in here. I mean, I think that conflating all these issues is very, very dangerous. And I think what we need to do is we need to focus on the accusations against the individual. Obviously, at this stage, there are allegations and they need to be investigated. And indeed, that's what's going on. Bringing everything else into this is a very dangerous thing to do. And also, I think, you know, what we're dealing here with is allegations of rape, allegations of sexual violence. There's two sides to the story. The two sides of the story need to be dealt with through the legal process. Simple as that. France is a country where there's endemic racism, endemic Islamophobia. Nobody can deny this. But let's wait for the courts to deal with this case and see what happens. The issue now is that I think there's too much conflation going on. And as we're seeing in other parts of the world, and indeed here in the UK, what's happening is women's stories, women's realities, their allegations are being put on the back burner, and instead there's all this talk about the victimization of men and the way that they're being treated, and this is simply not acceptable.
Roshan, leaked notes came out from the panel of judges. This is what we've got from there. It seems entirely legit. The judges refused bail because, and there are three reasons, to prevent pressure on witnesses or victims, as well as Tariq Ramadan escaping from the national territory, flight risk, and to prevent the renewal of the alleged offenses. So these are serious allegations, violent sexual assault. They don't want to see it happening again. Does that sound fair and reasonable to you?
There should be no leaks from the judge's office. There should be no discussion about this in the French media. I would respectfully disagree with Shaista on one point. French justice does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a context, and that context cannot be ignored at all. And that's why I don't think he's getting a fair hearing and get a fair trial. Of course, allegations need to be investigated, but they need to be investigated in an atmosphere of calm where justice can be done. And I don't see that happening at the moment. All I see is trial by media. And I think ultimately the people that are demonizing Tariq Ramadan, they're the ones that are conflating issues here. And I think I would say it's quite dangerous to conflate the misogyny and patriarchy which does exist in the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world with a particular case of this man who ultimately has been held for 1 month without formal charge, no access to his family, and his name is being dragged through the mud through the world's media.
Roshan, who do you think is demonizing him? I mean, if you could give me some examples.
Well, Manuel Valls, the former prime minister, for example. I mean, after he was, all these allegations came out, he went on French radio and he was saying that this guy is, he believes in Sharia law. So they're not just focusing on the character of Tariq Ramadan and the allegations. They're making it into an issue about Islam and political Islam. So, I'm just responding to what's already going on. I don't want to even talk about this on TV. I think justice should take its course. But it's clear that there's a poisonous atmosphere around this trial which negates the possibility of a fair trial. There is no way that Tariq Ramadan can get a fair trial in France.
Shaista, do you still think he can get a fair trial?
Well, I hope he can get a fair trial, because every human being should be entitled to a fair trial, to a robust justice system, and indeed victims and survivors are entitled to the same thing as well. And in relation to what you just said, Roshan, I do agree with you in terms of the poisonous, toxic environment that's been created. But I think this campaign about Free Tariq Ramadan also feeds into this as well. I myself have been contacted by Muslim women who I have a great deal of respect for, who I've known for many years, telling me not to speak about Tariq Ramadan, telling me to stay silent. When I asked them why are they asking me to do that, they said because he's a renowned scholar, he's a good man, he's a decent man. I said, look, a man's decency, a man's academic achievements have got absolutely nothing to do with a man being accused of very serious crimes. And this actually, I think for me, is what these issues are about. As
Okay,
I
that's
said,
interesting.
Silencing women.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So let me take that.
Women is at the heart of this.
So let me pose that to Roshan. How much of that could be, and I'm not saying this is you, Roshan, but how much of it could be people having a sense of denial and tribalism because he's a respected scholar, so they're like, listen, our guy can't be a rapist?
I think there is a culture of veneration of scholars in our community, and also these kind of YouTube scholars that have become major stars now. And I think that has gone too far, quite frankly. But I'm old-fashioned, Imran. I believe in the presumption of innocence. I believe that, if you start from the presumption that all men are bastards, that all men are guilty before they've been proven innocent, then, we're all guilty, aren't we? But ultimately, every man,
I don't
if it's
think
a man
anybody
or a
starts from that
woman,
assumption, Roshan.
Shaista, I'm not saying that you do. I'm just making a general statement. But I would, if it was a woman that was accused of crimes of the sexual harassment or other crimes, alleged crimes, then I would defend them as well. I don't see it as a male-female issue. But at the same time, I do agree with Shaista's general point that the Muslim world, Muslim organizations, we do suffer from, endemic, I wouldn't say hatred against women, but we have anti-woman attitudes and we need to sort that out. But I just think in this particular case of Tariq Ramadan, we shouldn't conflate all these issues.
Okay, I want to give the final word to Shaista. We're not in the courtroom. We're not sifting through the evidence. Again, this has been thrust into the culture wars, and this is one of the reasons why we're discussing it. Final word, Shaista. How do you want this to play out?
Well, I want it to be played out. I want Tariq Ramadan to have a fair and safe trial. I want him to be treated with dignity and respect in relation to the French justice system. Just as I want the women who've accused to be treated in exactly the same way, they should be also given a fair trial. They should be treated with dignity and respect. This issue about potential intimidation of witnesses is a very, very serious issue. And it's something that happens frequently to women when they do make these accusations. We've heard about women being intimidated at Oxfam when they came forward and talked about sexual assault and abuse in a massive international aid organization. So we know this happens across the board. And I just think that we have to be very careful because we do absolutely know that Islamophobia exists, racism exists, but that is not a reason to dismiss the fact that these allegations are very serious, and the French justice system, if it is accused of treating this man in a way that it shouldn't be treating him, then that is a separate issue to the actual allegations of rape, which cannot be brushed under the carpet. And I think, as the Muslim community in particular needs to wake up to these serious allegations, and they need to support the victims and survivors to speak up, because that's the only way that we're going to create a safe society for men and women.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got to move on, but it's been really good talking to both of you, Shaista Aziz and Roshan Mohammed Saleh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.